Okay, so under Applications, under Autodesk, you may have more than one version of Maya, I'm not sure, but we're using Maya 2017. So in that folder, and then there's, again, sorry, the screen resolution's a bit low here, but it says Maya here, and that's the application icon. One of the problems with working in this room is that every time you sign out, your preferences are erased, or sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, but you can't depend on them. So you can't put Maya in your dock at the bottom. I don't think it would remember in the future. But you should get something that looks like this. Okay. So before we get into Maya, one of the things that Maya relies on is the 3-button mouse. You have to have a 3-button mouse, and we do have officially the worst 3-button mouses in the world here. So you can bring in your own mouse and try and plug it in without a driver and see if it works. People have done that in the past. If you have to install a driver for the computer to run the mouse, then it won't work. But on the Mac, a lot of the time it just does. But if you're using these mice, then you're going to have to set the system preferences. So let's all do this. So it's going to look a little different on mine because I have a different mouse than you. But if you go up to the apple in the top left corner of the screen and go down to System Preferences, this is where you set all of your system preferences. You'll see this window, and right in the middle here, there's the mouse. Now mine doesn't look anything like yours because I have a different mouse, but what you'll see, so it's right in the middle. Let me go back and see people looking for it. So right here, totally invisible on the projector, but it's right there where it says mouse. And you'll see a picture of your mouse, and then it says, there are drop-down menus that says primary button, and then nothing above it. You want it to say primary button for the left click, secondary button for the right side of the mouse, and that little nub thing, the scroll nub, that should be button 3. So primary, secondary, button 3. Same. Your mouse is heavy. Okay. So the problem with this lab is that every time you come in and you want to use Maya, you got to do that. Every time you log out, it's going to forget that. You got to come in. You got to do that again. And if you don't do that, and I come over and try and help you, and I realize that you're not making any progress because you forgot to change your mouse settings. Well, I mean, whatever. Don't do that. Just change your mouse settings. Okay, we all good with that? Yeah, good. So now if we go back into Maya, you need this hand and one finger, okay? You can't work with one hand in Maya because this one finger is going to be pressing the Option Alt key all the time. So what we're seeing here in Maya is a 3D space, right? So this is a grid in the middle of our imaginary endless space. And if I want to navigate around it, if I hold down Alt Option and then left mouse drag, then I can, this is called tumbling around. So you imagine you're a little floating camera looking at this space. You're not moving that grid, you're moving yourself around the grid. So you're tumbling around. So holding down Alt and left mouse button. Alt and right mouse button, side to side, will make you zoom in and zoom out. It's actually called dollying because you're actually moving the camera rather than zooming, but it's hard to say dollying, so we'll say zooming. So you can zoom in and out. And then the middle mouse button, that little nub, if you hold down Alt, press that, you can, oh, mine's not working. You can track back and forth, so slide your view back and forth. So just play around with that, try that out a little bit. And make sure you're using the Alt Option key. Right beside it is the Command key, which will do other crazy things. Don't do that. Is that everybody good? Is that working? Those things are happening?
What is the middle one?
That tracks. So if I'm the camera, this is tracking. Tumbling is this. And zooming is this. Right? Okay. Yeah, don't use your trackpad. It won't work. If you only have a trackpad,
I know I was going to say
yeah, you can always do it on the other computer or whatever. You can. It'll be a frustrating experience to use the trackpad. Okay, so let's just stop for a sec, and let's just look around the interface a little bit. I'm sorry, this is sort of dry technical stuff, but we have to kind of just go through this a little bit, and you're really going to learn through doing it. You're going to forget everything I say, but I'm going to just tell you a couple of things. Your interface will look a little different than mine. I've got some custom icons that I use all the time up here. But the most important things here are is this panel view. So this is your window into the 3D world here. And then up here are options to make things happen. And then over to the side here are a bunch of menu sets that allow you to interact and change the properties of things on your screen. The important ones here are the channel box. So you can see on the right side, you'll see a tab that says channel box, layer editor. And there's another one you can't see on my screen because the resolution is so low, down at the bottom, called attribute editor. And this gives you information about the thing that you have selected. We have nothing selected, so it's empty. Okay. So let's create an object. So the first thing we can create is just a cube, let's say. So up in the top left here under this menu item, it says create, and go down. Now Maya is a very deep and broad program. There are millions of things you can do. We're just tunneling our way through to some very simple things. So most of the stuff you can forget about. But we're going to go to create polygon primitives and then just create a cube. Make sure it's a polygon primitive, not a NURBS or a volume, but a polygon primitive, because we'll be using polygons to model. And click on it, and a cube might pop up, or it might give you the option to draw out a cube. You just got a cube? Somebody's impressed with the cube. Nice. Okay, so there's my cube in the middle of the world at the 0, 0, 0 space. So let's talk about some directional terminology. In this world space, you have to navigate. If you're on a planet, you've got longitude and latitude to identify where you are. In space, you need 3 dimensions, right? So here we've got X, Y, and Z. So Y is up and down. Z and X are sort of interchangeable. But you can see an indication of them down here. So Y is up, and then Z and X are pointing out to the sides. So that's called the world space. That's going to become important later on if you get directions like move it up in Y, move it over in X. So now that I've got this selected here, you can see if you have the channel box open, it says this is called pcube1, and there are some qualities about it. It's got translate X, Y, and Z. So translate, do you know, means to move. Rotate means to rotate. Scale means to make bigger or smaller, of course. So if we type in a value to translate Y, like 1, and hit enter, you see the cube moves up, right? Type 0, hit enter, it goes back down to 0. So this is its absolute position in space. These numbers will define that. But of course, we don't want to just type in numbers to move things around. We want to grab things and move them around, right? So if you look over here, this is called your toolbox on the far left side. And this is your selection. You can skip, skip, and then we've got translate to move, rotate, rotate, and scale. The shortcuts for these are the QWERTY on your keyboard. So Q is select, W is move, E is rotate, and R is scale. I don't know why they didn't name R for rotate, but anyway, they didn't. So W, if I hit W now, you'll see this is called your gimbal or your manipulator handles. And so now with W, you can move your object around. So remember, if you hold down Option and left mouse click, you're moving your point of view around. If you grab one of these arrows and left mouse drag, then you can move the object around. Right? So if you grab an arrow, it's going to lock it into that axis of movement. So just so you know, for this first exercise, I've given you the skull puzzle. It's a skull, all the bones laid out on a floor. You've got to grab them all and put them back into place. So you've got to figure out what the bones are, except they're labeled, so you should be able to figure it out pretty easily. But if you don't know what the parietal is, you're going to have to look it up and figure it out. Figure out its orientation, put it together. I left out the ethmoids and some of the internal stuff, but the sphenoid is in there, so you have to figure that stuff out. So all this stuff I'm telling you about moving, rotating, you're going to have to do for this. Don't scale anything. It won't fit if you scale. So if I grab these arrows to move them, it locks them into that axis to move them around. You can see that my translate X, Y, and Z are changing as I do this. Right? Now if I want to lock it into two axes, like the Z and the X axis, so just kind of slide it around on the floor, I can grab this little square between them. And then it's just moving along those axes. One thing, if you haven't worked in 3D before, is getting used to working in this 3D space and knowing how you're moving things around. So if I want to lock it into X and Y, I can grab this one and it just moves it on that plane and so forth. If you want to move it freely around, just grab the thing in the middle and then you can move it freely around. Okay, we all good? Yeah? Good. Okay. So that's rotating. That's not rotating, that's moving. This is rotating. So with the thing selected, if I hit E, then we get a rotating gimbal or a manipulator. And same thing, if you grab the colored circle, you're going to rotate it but lock it in that axis. Right? If you just grab it in the middle of this big manipulator, then you can just rotate it freely around. If you want to go back to start, you can just put zeros in all of the translate X, Y, Z, rotate X, Y, Z. Then you go back to the beginning. And if you want to scale it, just hit R and you can scale it up and down. So for this first exercise though, don't scale anything. I repeat, do not scale anything. You'll be in trouble. Nothing will fit. Okay, all good. Smart people. Yes. Okay, and blow your mind. If you just tap the space bar over the window, if you just tap the space bar over the window, then you'll open up a 4 view. So what we've got here now is a top view, front view, and side view. So terminology, these are orthographic views, so there's no perspective distortion. Your window we were working in before is called your perspective window. So there's distortion of perspective. So as things go farther away from you, they appear smaller, right? If they get closer, they appear bigger. Here in side view, if I use the same controls, now you can't tumble in these views because you're locked to an orthographic view, so you can't change your angle of looking at it, but you can zoom in and out. Oh, it does get smaller. Never mind. Didn't do that before. But these are absolute measurements, so you can render something out from here, and it will be flattened without distortion of perspective. That is really strange, actually. Okay. Let me try that. Hold on a sec. Oh no, I know what it is. If I move this thing away from the orthographic camera, so you can see I'm sliding it along in X. It's not changing its size here at all, even though it's moving away from the camera. That's the thing. So when you're going to be working in Maya, if you want to place things accurately in 3D space, it's difficult to do in that perspective view because you kind of lose sight of how far things are away from you or close to you. So a lot of the time you want to place things in X. So you put your mouse over the window and tap the space bar, and we'll maximize this. And let's say, okay, I need this to be over here in X. So this is the side view. And then tap into the front view and say, well, I need this to be over here in front. So now, if I go back to perspective, I've changed it both in the front and side. I'm at this sort of 3/4 position now. So when you're doing this exercise, you're going to have to go in, select things, move them, rotate them to change the orientation, and place them close together. This is the first time I've done this. I don't know how it's going to go. I'm sure it'll be fine. You guys will get it. But once you finish it, you'll really understand how to manipulate the 3D space and work your way around it. Okay? So before we go on to that, let me just show you something you're going to be using in the later modeling exercises, or the modeling project. And that's manipulating the components of an object. Okay? So this is the object's transformation node. So we can change these things to move its position and orientation, scale, and space. But if we want to change its shape, we have to select its components. So if I just get in a little bit closer here, and if I right-click on the object, or if I have it selected, and I right-click away from the object, oops, sorry, my screen is too... Okay, it's going to be hard to see. Let me try this again. Okay, so if you right-click, you're going to see something like this. So you see this? This is called a contextual menu that comes up. I'm sorry that you can't see it, but oh, you can see it sort of now. Right at the top, you can see it says Object Mode. It says Vertex Mode. It says Face Mode. It doesn't say Mode, but it is Mode. And then at the very top here, just cut off on my screen, it says Edge Mode. It doesn't say Mode, it says Edge. It says Edge. So the Object Mode, so these are the ones we need to know. Object, Edge, Vertex, and Face. So let's talk about the obvious ones first. Edge, if we go to Edge Mode, now we can select the edges of the object. And you can do the same things to them. You can hit W, and then you can move the edges around to change its shape. All right. Move it up and down, whatever, whatever. If you want to select more than one thing in Maya, you can marquee select, which is click and drag to select, and it will, whatever your mouse goes over there, that box, will select those. Or you can use Shift, so I can click on one edge, hold down Shift, and click on another edge. Then you can move those two together. What's going on over there? You guys okay? Okay, I see some deformed objects coming up here. Good. Any problems? Problems? Yeah? Okay, I lost it. Where do they go? Perfect. Okay, so I hear grumbling, I hear squeaks of joy. I don't hear any of that. But if you feel really frustrated with technology, get used to it. If you really don't like that, don't take the class. Honestly. Because you're going to be working in Maya a lot. Okay, everybody, attention, please. I want you to work through this, but if you find that this frustrates you, you hate it, this is not the type of thing for you, I've got a waiting list. I don't want to see any of you go, but you're going to be doing this a lot. Okay? And it happens every year that somebody gets in, they just don't want to work in Maya, they don't do good work because they find it technically frustrating, and they're not willing to be patient enough to work through it. That's perfectly fine, but it would be better for you not to be here if that's the case. I'll give you lots of support, but if you're not willing to try something a little outside of your comfort area of familiar things, then you're going to be in trouble. You're just not going to be as successful as you want to be. Okay? So, again, if you right-click, we can go to Vertex Mode with the object selected. And the vertices, vertex singular, vertices plural, are the little dots at the confluence of the edges. And this is actually where you do most of your modeling, moving vertices around. So grabbing these things and changing the shape of an object in 3D by moving a vertex around. And again, if I tap my space bar to go into my 4 views, and then tap to go into, say, my side view, I can be a little more deliberate about exactly where I want to place this in space. So most of the time when you're working in 3D, you work in the orthographic views, front, side, top, to do the placement of things exactly, and then you go back into the perspective to evaluate, to see if your shape is correct. It becomes a very natural thing over time, because you just keep working that way, and you get an idea for manipulating the 3D space. So there's vertices, edges, and faces is the last one. So if I right-click and go to face, which is at the bottom here of this top part of the menu, then we can actually select the big broad planes of the cube, and we can move these around too. So when you're actually modeling your the face in Maya, you're going to be manipulating the polygon faces to change the shape of your object, in addition to the edges and the vertices. So, sorry, what's your name? Got lost a little while ago. What's your name? Meadow. So Meadow had a problem where I couldn't resolve it, but sometimes this will happen. You're working in a scene and you kind of go away from everything, and you can't find your way back, like you're lost way out here in space. So one thing you can do, if you hit the A key, that will frame all. So if there are any objects in your scene, it will take your camera right back to where those things are. If you happen to have that thing selected, oh, and sorry, to go back to object mode, you just right-click again, and then up, you can't see it on mine, but there's one that says, yeah, there it is, object mode, and you can go back to object mode. The shortcut is F8 to go between object mode and component mode, but on these Macs, it's often mapped to like pausing or playing your music or something. So you press function F8. The other thing is, if you happen to have something selected and you're off in the middle of nowhere, if you hit F, it will frame selected. So A is frame all, F is frame selected. Okay, I'm going to stop talking soon. I'll let you just play around with this skull puzzle. But I just wanted to show you how to select multiple objects here. So if I duplicate this, and don't worry about duplicating it, but if I have 3 copies of this thing, if I want to select more than one, I can marquee select over them. I can select one and shift select another one. And here's the tricky part. If I want to subtract from my selection, I can hold down Control and select something. If I want to toggle my selection, which means select something and deselect something else. So right now this one is selected. If I hold down Shift before selecting them and go over both of them, it will deselect this one and select this one. little things that will become more important as you're working on your models, but selecting will come up. So let's just jump into the skull puzzle now, because I think I've given you enough of the tools you need to actually get things done. So let me open that up. Recent files. Okay. So you're going to see something like this, okay? So I've just made like a plane on the ground, just a polygon plane. If you guys have your phones out, can you please, I don't want to repeat this. We've got a polygon plane on the ground, we've got a whole bunch of elements of the skull. And the polygon plane is locked, so you can't accidentally select it. So if you see if I marquee select over it, I can't select it. So you can see that when something is selected, it's highlighted in white or green. The green is the thing that was the last thing in the selection. So you can see this little nasal bone down here happened to be the last thing in that big group selection. If I only select one thing, it's highlighted in green. If I select two things, the last thing selected is highlighted in green. And you can see we're in what's called shaded mode now. We're actually in lighting mode. So you can actually see shadows on the object, and you may see in yours shadows being cast. That's sometimes useful for understanding the proximity of objects to another, the shadow being cast from one onto another. So I set this scene up with some lights that you can't see right now, but they are shining light down into the scene. Now right now we're looking at it in lit shaded mode. If I hit 4 on my keyboard, I go into what's called wireframe mode, where I see the objects, but I just see all the edges that make up the object. And this is useful if you've got, let's say, the mesh of a face over top of a skull. You want to see it in wireframe, so you can select some internal point or something. So that's 4 on the keyboard. 5 on the keyboard goes into shaded mode. And you see there's no checkerboard on the plane anymore because it doesn't show textures. So a texture is an image placed on an object. So that's 5. 6 shows nothing, so go to 7. 7 will show textures and lighting. 6 usually just shows textures. I don't know why it's blowing out like that. But. Okay. So let's say we want to start building this skull again. We have to identify the parts. So one way to identify them is to, if somebody was nice enough to label them, if you click on it and open the channel box, your channel box might be open already, and you can see up here where we saw this translate, rotate, scale stuff, the name of the object. Last time it was P cube, now it's frontal. That's the frontal bone, right? You can see because there's the superior orbital margin here, inside of the orbits, where it connects with the nasal bones, the frontal bossing here, you know, all that stuff. So this is a good place to start. This is a recognizable object, so maybe we want to grab it. Hit W. Remember, W goes to translate. Or you can, sorry, I've got it in this kind of weird mode. You can go to translate over here. You can see when I'm working, I'm often I turn off all of the user interface elements. That's Control Spacebar, and it just shuts down everything. So because I know the shortcuts for move, rotate, and scale, so I can just do that. So if I can grab this and try and move it in roughly into where I think it's going to be placed. Now I don't want him looking up at the sky. So if I look at this, so here's the frontal bone, this big blue one here, superior orbital margins, the frontal part's pointing to the front, hence the name. So I can have to rotate this one a little bit. So E for rotate. And I want to make sure that I'm just rotating it, in this case, just in the x-axis. So I'm grabbing the red line here and rotating it roughly into position. And I can move it up more a little bit, right? Yeah? Okay.
I'll say it.
Yeah, just yell it out.
Yeah.
Well, don't yell. So, okay, now let's think. Yes.
How do you get rid of the green gridding?
Like if you deselect something, it would go away. Do you mean when it's all
Yeah,
wireframe?
moving it around, it's really bothersome to see that green. It's like,
Let me see.
if I'm constructing it.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point actually. That's kind of advanced mode a little bit, but so just pay attention to this for a second because this is useful but can possibly be very confusing. So when you have something selected, it's all highlighted and you see all the details of the edges, but it's hard to make out the features then, right? So in this panel, what you can do temporarily is under the Show menu. So you'll see each panel has its own set of menus here, and each one has a Show menu. So in the panel you're working in, you can go to Show, and there's a whole list of things you can turn on and off. But this one called Selection Highlighting. Unfortunately, there's no keyboard shortcut for it. But if you just turn that off, then you can see the things you have selected are no longer highlighted. So you can still. Yep. So and so if you want to turn the highlighting back on, you go to Show, Selection Highlighting. I'll post this video too. I'm recording all this, so I'll post it so you can review that as well. So if I turn Selection Highlighting back on, then it turns green. If I go to Show, Selection Highlighting off. And then this is actually, I often turn off Selection Highlighting when I'm working with a dense mesh because it's got so many edges. So let's select another bone. Let's take the parietal. So if I open my channel box, this is my right parietal, well, his right parietal. So then I wanted to start to move this into place, okay? So I can do this first. I would maybe move it in the front view here. And kind of move it close to where it should be. Spacebar tap. And so even though in the front view it looks like it's very close to the skull, or to the frontal bone, frontal view, frontal bone, it's confusing, but if we look in the side view, you can see it's actually pretty far away from it still. So we have to put it into place both in the front and side view. And then we can go into the perspective view and try and fix it up a little bit. So I need to rotate it a bit to try and make it fit. So you can see the sutures here. So this is the, does anybody know what this suture is called here? Coronal, right? So let's talk about our directions on the body. We're going to do more of this. Okay, coronal. Look, cutting through the body this way, right? Sagittal, it's the archer. So you're going like this. So it's cutting through the body this way. Transverse, cutting through the body this way. Superior, right? Up. Inferior. Lateral, away from the body, medial towards the body. Posterior, to the back. Anterior to the front, right? We're good? Good. There's, in the next exercise you do, there's reference to all those, so you can learn it through there, but if you're not familiar with it. So I want to make sure this looks like it's oriented correctly. These sutures are going to line up, so you can see that I'm using the arrows mostly rather than free form moving it around, because you can be a little more precise this way. That's pretty good. Maybe this is going to be easier than I thought. Maybe I should make it harder. I should put some fake bones in there. Oh, no, you're... Yes. Yeah. Opening the file is hard, yeah. That took a half an hour. So I don't think I need to describe any more than that what to do, but you just have to select the objects, discover what they are, put them into the correct place. So where do I want you to build this? Kind of where I'm building it, floating above sort of the middle of the plane here, something like that. And again, can I please reiterate? See scale here? Do not change the scale. If I change this scale, it's not going to fit anymore, right? So if you happen to change the scale by accident, because it could happen, select the object And just look in the channel box under where it says scale. And if it's a number other than 1, then you've scaled it. And just type in 1 in XYZ scale, and you'll go back to normal. Capiche? Okay, so listen. There's a bunch of bones. Don't forget these 2 little ones. Those are the nasal bones. The teeth are all together. Well, the top teeth and the mandibular and the maxillary teeth are all together. And there's also the hyoid over here. So the hyoid you have to eyeball, sort of where it should go, because it doesn't attach to anything. It's a free-floating bone, as you know. Okay? So you want to just work on that? What time is it?